of the little things I love in The Lord of the Rings is a single word. And it's tricky singling out just one word from the many words that are in the trilogy. In case you don't know, there are over 500,000 words in it, give or take a dozen or so. And they're all of different varieties. They're mostly in English, or in this context, the common speech, or Westron. And the majority of them are words we use all the time. Some examples, chosen at random, might be: the morning came, pale and clammy. The snow slackened until it almost ceased. The others turned in amazement, for the voice was Sam's. These could come from anywhere, more or less. There are also plenty of words that don't come up in quote-unquote normal conversation. Words like hobbit, orc, ent, entwife, worm-tongue. I don't know what kinds of conversations those quote-unquote normal people are having to not include words like that, but we'll let that be. There are lots of other words, too, which are in other languages, which isn't strange since Tolkien was a philologist, which basically means he was a studier of not just languages, but the history of languages, how they evolved over time, and, to use a Tolkien phrase, linguistic aesthetics. He also invented his own languages. In one of his letters, he notes, "Many children make up, or begin to make up, imaginary languages. I have been at it since I could write." Appendix F in The Return of the King is all about the languages that appear, or are at least referenced, throughout the book, and there are several. They include Quenya, the invented language for the elves, which has phrases like Ilen sila lumen omentielmo, or
Arel berethglil thoniel, sidivren penamiriel o menel aglar elenath, nachaired palandiriel o galathrem min enorath, fanuilos lelinathon, nevaya si nevayaron.
There's the Rohirric language, where something like Westu Theoden Hal would be a natural thing to say. There's the Black speech of Mordor, as revealed in the phrase Ashnag Durbatuluk, Ashnag Gimbatul, Ashnag Thrakatuluk, Agbuzmishi Krimpatul. There's Entish.
Tarun narun 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 tahora kumba kumbanun. Tahura hara lambanun, the lambatara mundarun, the mundaram, the rundaram, the mundalamba mundatom.
And there's whatever this is.
Hey, come Meridal, Deridal, me darling. Light goes the weather wind and the feathered starling.
Those spoken quotes, by the way, are Tolkien himself, recorded in 1967, available as part of the J.R.R. Tolkien audio collection. It's a treat to listen to, if only to get the pronunciations and poetic rhythms right. But no, the word that I'm talking about isn't in any of those languages. It's in English, or Westron, the common speech. And it appears late in the chapter, The Choices of Master Samwise. Sam has said his goodbye to Frodo, who has been stung by Shelob. Sam thinks Frodo is dead, and he has taken the role of ring-bearer upon himself. But the idea of his master in the hands of the orcs troubles him greatly, and so he lingers on this side of the Ethelduath, the mountain range on which sits Cirith Ungol, and is the ultimate boundary between Gondor and Mordor. He listens in on a conversation between two orc captains, Gorbag and Shagrat. He, Sam, stood still listening for a little, hoping perhaps to learn something useful. Perhaps Gorbag, who seemed to belong to Minas Morgul, would come out and he could then slip in.
"No, I don't know," said Gorbag's voice. "The messages go through quicker than anything could fly, as a rule. But I don't inquire how it's done. Safest not to. Grr, those Nazgûl give me the creeps, and they skin the body off you as soon as look at you, and leave you all cold in the dark on the other side. But he likes 'em. They're his favourites nowadays, so it's no use grumbling. I tell you, it's no game serving down in the city."
Did you notice it? The word? Yes, it's creeps.
Those Nazgûl give me the creeps.
Poor Shagrat is not wrong to feel this way. We have experienced the effect the Nazgûl have on people before this. Frodo's first encounter with a Nazgul, which he only knows as a rider all in black, sniffing, he is certain, for him, leaves Frodo saying, "Well, I call that very queer and disturbing. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before." Sam then tells Frodo and Pippin of the encounter his gaffer had with the Black Rider back in Hobbiton, and he quotes his father this way: "Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder." After they have left Gildor and his fellow elves, we read, "A long-drawn wail came down the wind, like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell, and ended on a high piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood." In Bree, Merry encounters two Black Riders, at a distance, and says, "I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified." In Crickhollow, when the Black Riders advance on Frodo's house there, Fatty Bolger, who is dressed as Frodo, notes, "a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord, and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall." At Weathertop, Frodo thought that he heard a faint hiss as of venomous breath, and felt a thin, piercing chill. Then the shapes slowly advanced. Terror overcame Merry and Pippin, and they threw themselves flat on the ground. Sam shrank to Frodo's side. Frodo was hardly less terrified than his companions. He was quaking as if he was bitter cold. And in the flight to the ford, their cold eyes glittered, and they called to him with fell voices. Fear now filled all Frodo's mind. It goes on and on. This effect is felt whenever the Black Riders are present, but it's up to Shagrat to verbalize it as, "Those Nazgul give me the creeps," which is as accurate as it is succinct. But for me, that word sticks out so much in ways that are hard for me to verbalize. I mean, this is a book with linguistic aesthetics to spare. It has phrases in it like, "That is the doom that we must deem." "I am the servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor." They crossed the Nimrodel, curse their foul feet in its clean water. "Begone, foul Dwimmerlake, lord of carrion, leave the dead in peace." "Yahoy, yahari hoy, up, up." So, what's up with "those Nazgul give me the creeps"? It has such a modern feel to it, to my ear anyway, which is strange because everything about the book is meant to feel ancient, or at least old, from another time long ago, without the modern trappings of today's world, or the world of the early 20th century that Tolkien was writing in. There are some anachronisms, of course, mostly in The Hobbit, but they are in The Lord of the Rings too, such as the reference to Gandalf's dragon firework passing like an express train. And the argument can be made that Lobelia Sackville Baggins's umbrella, or more pointedly Sam's potatoes, or his tobacco, even if it is called pipeweed, are anachronistic to the ancient Northern European setting that Middle-earth is meant to evoke, the latter two items coming over from the New World, or the Americas, to European shores around the 16th century. Tolkien, in his letters, talks about Middle-earth being prehistorical to our own, citing a gap of about 6,000 years between then and now, which is both pre-Age of Exploration as well as pre-Christian. But we let all that go for the sake of the story, and the fact that Tolkien himself admits there isn't complete verisimilitude going on here. Do we do the same with the creeps? Well, despite what I might think, the word is on the old side. Creep goes back to Middle English. As far as the feeling that is evoked by saying the creeps, that seems to be old too, about the 17th century, where people might experience creeping or the creepings. Charles Dickens uses the word, well, creep, in Barnaby Rudge, published in book form in 1841. "You make my hair stand on end and my flesh creep." This usage evolved over the next century to become creeps, which is defined in Merriam-Webster's dictionary as a distressing sensation like that caused by the creeping of insects over one's flesh. All of the prior descriptions of the feeling that the Nazgûl give to people are a bit more elaborate than that. Shagrat just boils it down to that one word. A word which is not so new as my ear seems to want to make it out to be. And what's especially curious here is that this one word not only has an interesting history of its own, but it has a just as interesting history within the writing of The Lord of the Rings itself. For that, we have Christopher Tolkien's monumental History of Middle-earth series, specifically volumes 6 through 9, which focus on the manuscript history of The Lord of the Rings. Do yourself a favor and get a hold of it. No need to read every word, of which there are maybe another 500,000, but it provides a fascinating look into Tolkien's creative process, how he worked through various ideas before settling on what we now know as the text, as well as looking at early drafts which can be viewed as the sketchbooks of an artist. In the set, we find that that word, creeps, and the phrase within which it is said, does not originate at the end of what would become the second volume, as it does in the published text. It actually appears much earlier, and it's not said by an orc, but by a hobbit by the name of Trotter. Trotter appears in the earliest drafts of what became the Fellowship of the Ring, being written around the late summer of 1938, back when Frodo was named Bingo. And Trotter shows up first in a corner of the Prancing Pony, and is introduced this way. Suddenly, Bingo noticed that a queer-looking, brown-faced hobbit, sitting in the shadows behind the others, was also listening intently. He was dressed in dark, rough brown cloth, and had a hood on, in spite of the warmth. And, very remarkably, he had wooden shoes. Trotter eventually joins the hobbits and says, "I fancy you'll have to leave the open road after tonight's accident. I don't think somehow you will be wanting to meet any of these black riders, if you can help it. They give me the creeps." He shuddered, and they saw with surprise that he had drawn his hood over his face, which was buried in his hands. Trotter remains as Trotter into what Christopher calls the third phase of the writing of the book, which is approximately very late in 1938, the writing having progressed off and on for about a year at this point. There will be 11 more years of writing to come. Trotter is still a hobbit, and still afraid of the Nazgûl. "You'll have to leave the open road after tonight, for if you ask me, I should say that these riders are patrolling it, and still looking for your party. I don't fancy that you wish to meet them. I don't. They give me the creeps," he ended suddenly with a shudder. By the fourth phase of the writing, we're talking later into 1939 at this point, Trotter is gradually going from a hobbit to a man, whose real name is Aragorn, and also gradually becoming the Strider, or eventually just Strider. Bingo has become Frodo, and he now has something to say about his pursuers. "The Black Riders are hunting me, and they are perilous. They are servants of the necromancer." Which is more along the lines of what we get in the final book, although it is now Strider who is doing the talking. "You may escape from Bree and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible." Which I should say is far more effective, both in character and in language, than what is said by Trotter, who is set up to become the person who will lead our hobbits to Rivendell after their night at the Prancing Pony. After all, how would you feel following someone who admits to shuddering just at the thought of the Black Riders, who give him the creeps? I'm not saying Strider, or Aragorn, isn't in some way afraid of them too, but his approach, his wording, is much more what our hobbits want and need to hear. So, the creeps are now gone from the manuscript, and yet they're still in the text. When you go through the History of Middle-earth series, you can see that Tolkien didn't let things just disappear. When he had a chance to reuse something, he did. So it seems to have made sense to him for that phrase to make a reappearance as he worked through Frodo and Sam's adventure at Cirith Ungol, spelled with a K, not a C at this point, the writing of which is happening roughly around May of 1944, where Sam at first fights No Spider, then fights one called Ungoliante. In this mix of writing, he overhears a conversation between two orcs, Nazgûl and Shagrat. They are discussing how messages are transmitted through Mordor.
Believe me, it was nearly another day before they started to send a message to Lugburs.
How did they do that? Said Shagrat.
I've often wondered. I don't know, and I don't want to.
Christopher then tells us the manuscript of the Choices of Master Samwise was in almost all respects very close to the chapter in the Two Towers. He does not give us the text in the History of Middle-earth volume where this appears, The War of the Ring, presumably because it's as we have it in the final book. Christopher generally gives us the full text of the manuscript only when it diverges substantially from the published work. So it's clearly here that the word creeps creeps back in. And where it didn't make sense for Strider to use the word and phrase, here it makes much more sense. This uncouth, to my ears anyway, word that has such an odd feeling among all the other words in the trilogy. I mean, it's almost onomatopoeic in some ways. Creeps. But it makes sense for an orc to say it, rather than a hobbit or a man. Returning now to Appendix F, we learn, it is said, the orcs had no language of their own, but took what they could of other tongues and perverted it to their own liking. Yet they made only brutal jargons, scarcely sufficient even for their own needs, unless it were for curses and abuse. And these creatures, being filled with malice, hating even their own kind, quickly developed as many barbarous dialects as there were groups or settlements of their race, so that their orcish speech was of little use to them in intercourse between different tribes. So it was that in the Third Age, orcs used for communication between breed and breed the Westron tongue. That is, the common speech. I don't know necessarily that creeps fits in with that description. It's really talking about the specific orc languages. But if they are going to grab a word in the common tongue that carries the message for this feeling that Shagrat is talking about, let it be a creepy one rather than a poetic one. The crazy thing is that, simplistic though it might be, that feeling of the creeps, which the Nazgûl give, extends even to those who are on their side. Clearly the Nazgûl can't help it, or don't want to, and the orcs have to suffer right along with everyone else. As Aragorn says, it is no uncommon thing with these foul folk. And so, Shagrat and his creeps are just one of the little things that I love in The Lord of the Rings. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.